Well, I don't know what to say, except I absolutely must decline to dance in the streets for Gertrude's Stein. And as for Alice B. chocolates, I'd sooner Shakespeare and a great big box of chocolates. That really belongs to Gertrude Stein. She was asked when she said when she was dying, what is the answer? But then she said, what is the question?
Brendan Francis Aidan Behan, 9th of February 1923 to the 20th of March 1964, was an Irish poet, short story writer, novelist, playwright, and Irish Republican, an activist who wrote in both English and Irish. He was named by the US website Irish Central as one of the greatest Irish writers of all time. An Irish Republican and a volunteer in the Irish Republican Army, Behan was born in Dublin into a staunchly Republican family, becoming a member of the IRA's youth organisation Fianna Éireann at the age of 14. There was also a strong emphasis on Irish history and culture in his home, which meant he was steeped in literature and patriotic ballads from an early age. At age 16, Behan joined the IRA, which led to his serving time in a Borstal youth prison in the United Kingdom and imprisonment in Ireland. During this time, he took it upon himself to study, and he became a fluent speaker of the Irish language. Subsequently released from prison as part of a general amnesty given by the Fianna Fáil government in 1946, Behan moved between homes in Dublin, Kerry and Connemara, and also resided in Paris for a time. In 1954, Behan's first play, The Quare Fellow, was produced in Dublin. It was well received. However, it was the 1956 production at Joan Littlewood's Theatre Workshop in Stratford, London, that gained Behan a wider reputation. This was helped by a famous drunken interview on BBC television with Malcolm Muggeridge. In 1958, Behan's play in the Irish language, An Gial, had its debut at Dublin's Damer Theatre. Later, The Hostage, Behan's English language adaptation of An Gial, met with great success internationally. 'Twas on an August morning, all in the dawning hours, I went to take the warming air, all in the mouth of flowers. And there I saw a maiden, and mournful was her cry. Ah, what will mend my broken heart? I've lost my laughing boy. So strong, so wild and brave he was, I'll mourn his loss too sore, when thinking that I'll hear the laugh or springing step no more. Ah, curse the times and sad the loss my heart to crucify, that an Irish son with a rebel gun shot down my laughing boy. Oh, had he died by Pierce's side or in the GPO, killed by an English bullet from the rifle of a foe, or forcibly fed with ash lay dead in the dungeons of Mountjoy, I'd have cried with pride for the way he died, my own dear laughing boy. My princely love, can ageless love do more than tell to you? Go Rabbi Mael Mathagat for all you tried to do, for all you did and would have done my enemies to destroy. I'll mourn your name and praise your fame forever, my laughing boy. Behan's autobiographical novel, Borstal Boy, was published the same year and became a worldwide bestseller. By the early 1960s, Behan reached the peak of his fame. He spent increasing amounts of time in New York City, famously declaring, "To America, my newfound land, the man that hates you hates the human race." By this point, Behan began spending time with various prominent people such as Harpo Marx and Arthur Miller, and was followed by a young Bob Dylan. However, this newfound fame did nothing to aid his health or his work, with his alcoholism and diabetes medical conditions continuing to deteriorate. Brendan Behan's New York and Confessions of an Irish Rebel received little praise. He briefly attempted to combat this by a dry stretch while staying at the Chelsea Hotel in New York, and in 1961 was admitted to Sunnyside Private Hospital, an institute for the treatment of alcoholism in Toronto, but he once again turned back to alcohol and relapsed back into active alcoholism. Behan was born in the inner city of Dublin at Hull Street Hospital on the 9th of February 1923 into an educated working-class family. His mother, Kathleen Behan, née Kearney, had two sons, Sean Furlong and Rory Roger Casement Furlong, from her first marriage to compositor Jack Furlong. After Brendan was born, she had three more sons and a daughter, Seamus, Brian, Dominic and Carmel. They first lived in a house on Russell Street near Mountjoy Square, owned by his grandmother, Christine English, who owned a number of properties in the area. Brendan's father, Stephen Behan, a house painter who had fought in the War of Independence, read classical literature to the children at bedtime, including the works of Zola, Galsworthy and Maupassant. Their mother, Kathleen, took them on literary tours of the city. She remained politically active all her life and was a personal friend of the Irish leader, Michael Collins. Kathleen published her autobiography, Mother of All the Behans, a collaboration with her son Brian in 1984. Brendan Behan wrote a lament to Collins, The Laughing Boy, at the age of 13. The title was from the affectionate nickname Mrs. Behan gave to Collins. Behan's uncle, Peadar Kearney, wrote the Soldier's Song, which became the Irish national anthem Amra Nabia Fian when translated into Irish. His brother Dominic was also a songwriter, best known for the song The Patriot Game. His brother Brian was a prominent radical political activist and public speaker, actor, author and playwright. Biographer Ulick O'Connor wrote that one day, aged 8, Brendan was returning home with his granny and a friend from a pub. A passerby remarked, "Oh my, isn't it terrible, Mum, to see such a beautiful child deformed?" "How dare you," joked his granny. "He's not deformed, he's just drunk." In 1937, the Behan family moved to a newly built local council housing scheme in Kildare Road, Crumlin, then seen by Dubliners as the countryside. Stephen muttered that the working classes were being sent to hell or to Kimmage, a parody of Oliver Cromwell's demand that the Irish be sent to hell or to Connacht. At this stage, Behan left school at 13 to enter apprenticeship to follow in his father and both grandfathers' footsteps as a house painter.
I published a piece of verse in the Irish Times in Irish. It was about the death of Oscar Wilde in Paris. It was much praised by the local mandarins, and later in the week there was a vicious letter in the paper attacking it as brutal and ugly. Jesus help me with, didn't I think I was a great man altogether when complete strangers would go to the trouble of abusing me? Until I discovered that the letter was by someone who disliked me on grounds purely social and racial, and thought it was a disgrace that the likes of me should be allowed into print at all unless it was in the criminal intelligence. I suppose they were great days. I was younger anyway, and even if I had no money, there were people in the literary pubs in the vicinity of Grafton Street that would give me an odd pint of porter or a glass of malt betimes, as long as I could listen respectfully enough to the old chat about angst. A generation or so ago there were arson around the bog, and a bowl of stirabout or a couple of platefuls of spuds would have cured all the angst from here back to Norway. But since the change over in 1922, when they got well down to the porridge pot, there was no holding them. It started off with top hats and white ties and getting into the gentry, and then to chatting about the servant problem with the Anglo-Irish horse Protestants, who at least were rare to it. And it went from that to late dinner, and now it's angst, no less. Not that the horse Protestants were any better, but they were longer at it. They are just as ignorant, except that their ill manners are sharpened by time. Sheridan was a peasant's grandson, Yeats an artist's son, Wilde a doctor's son, Parnell was the grandson of an American sea captain, Robert Emmet a doctor's son, Bernard Shaw a clerk. The myth of the Anglo-Irish and the attempt to drag Irish writers, particularly those who happen to be Protestants, after the fox hunt and the royalist inanity, would have us believe that the most rapacious, rack-renting landlord class in Europe were really lamps of culture in a bog of darkness, doing good by stealth and shoving copies of Horizon under the half-doors of the peasantry after dark, and making wedding presents to the cottagers of Ganymede Press reproductions of Gauguin. There is, of course, no such thing as an Anglo-Irish man, as Shaw pointed out in the preface to John Bull's Other Ireland, except as a class distinction. Even all Protestant genius is not noble for the stable boys and girls. It must at least wear a collar and tie. Sean O'Casey is not claimed as an Anglo-Irish writer because he had no land, except what a window box would hold on the windowsill of a tenement. The Belfast industrial workers, who are the thickest concentration of royalism and pro-Britishism in Ireland, are never claimed as Anglo-Irish. The whole thing nowadays is a middle-class myth. One thing about Dublin which is indicative of this is that the middle classes are inflicted with a desire to ride. They have their daughters going bandy, taking riding lessons out there in Stillorgan and competing at the horse show. When Yeats said about Dublin, great hatred, little room, he was referring to the middle and so-called upper classes. It's the working class that binds me to this town. They're the only real people here. The middle class have pushed years on me. If they didn't see my name in the Sunday Times and the Observer, they wouldn't want to know me. And that goes for Catholics as well as Protestants, lawyers as well as doctors. Not that I'm idealising the working class. Far from it. They don't pretend to care. Their attitude is, well, they know me a long time, they see me around for as long as they can remember, and they don't give a damn what I'm doing or think I'm doing. They have a great spirit and good neighbourly hearts. If they couldn't do you a good turn, well, they wouldn't do you a bad one.
Behan's prison experiences were central to his writing career. In Mountjoy, he wrote his first play, The Landlady, and also began to write short stories and other prose. It was a literary magazine called Envoy, founded by John Ryan, that first published Behan's short stories and his first poems. Some of his early work was also published in The Bell, the leading Irish literary magazine of the time. He learned Irish in prison, and after his release in 1946, he spent some time in the Gaeltacht areas of counties Galway and Kerry, where he started writing poetry in Irish. He left Ireland and all its perceived social pressures to live in Paris in the early 1950s. There, he felt he could lose himself and release the artist within. Although he still drank heavily, he managed to earn a living, supposedly by writing pornography. He returned to Dublin and began to write seriously and to be published in serious papers such as the Irish Times, for which he wrote in 1953, drawing on his extensive knowledge of criminal activity in Dublin and Paris. He wrote a serial that was later published as The Scarpera. Throughout the rest of his writing career, he would rise at 7 in the morning and work until noon, when the pubs opened. He began to write for radio, and his play The Leaving Party was broadcast. Literary Ireland in the 1950s was a place where people drank. Behan's fortunes changed in 1954 with the appearance of his play The Queer Fellow. Originally called The Twisting of Another Rope and influenced by his time spent in jail, it chronicles the vicissitudes of prison life leading up to the execution of the Queer Fellow, a character who is never seen. The prison dialogue is vivid and laced with satire, but reveals to the reader the human detritus that surrounds capital punishment. Produced in the Pike Theatre in Dublin, the play ran for 6 months. In May 1956, the Quare Fellow opened in the Theatre Royal Stratford East in a production by Joan Littlewood's Theatre Workshop. Subsequently, it transferred to the West End. Behan generated immense publicity for the Quare Fellow as a result of a drunken appearance on the Malcolm Muggeridge TV show. Behan loved the story of how, walking along the street in London shortly after this episode, a Cockney approached him and exclaimed that he understood every word he had said, drunk or not, but had not a clue what that bugger Muggeridge was on about. While addled, Brendan would clamber on stage and recite the play's signature song, The Old Triangle. Brendan Behan was once invited to Oxford to take part in a debate about the difference between prose and poetry. His opponent spoke for almost 2 hours. Behan rose to his feet and promised to be brief. He recited an old Dublin rhyme. There was a young fella named Rollocks who worked for Ferrier Pollux. As he walked on the strand with a girl by the hand, the water came up to his ankles. That, declared Behan, is prose. But if the tide had been in, it would have been poetry. Red Envoy. I bring no songs of rolling drums, of pennons flying gaily. I sing of filth and dirty slums, gaunt man with hunger crazy. Canticles not of virtue bright, nor holy austere lives. I chronicle consumption's blight and the haggard face of wives. Who gaze upon children pale and wan, who see no flowers nor hear birds' song. I see no beauty rave in dreams of justice unto those who keep the wheels of old earth moving and oil them with their woes. Of burning towns and brimstone red, a phoenix from the ashes dead, our city truth and justice wed arise. I see this old bad order die in a great swift blaze of fire, a structure clear and mighty high, born in its funeral pyre. Worker, know the world's for thee, work through to raise the servile knee from on the ground. His autobiographical novel Borstal Boy followed in 1958. In the vivid memoir of his time in St Andrew's House, Hollesley Bay Colony, Borstal, near Woodbridge, Suffolk, England. The site of the St Andrew's House is now a Category D men's prison and young offenders institution. An original voice in Irish literature boomed out from its pages. The language is both acerbic and delicate, the portrayal of inmates and screws cerebral. For a Republican, though, it is not a vitriolic attack on Britain. It delineates Behan's move away from violence. By the end, the idealistic boy rebel emerges as a realistic young man who recognises the truth. Violence, especially political violence, is futile. I respect kindness in human beings first of all, and kindness to animals. I don't respect the law. I have a total irreverence for anything connected with society except that which makes the roads safer, the beer stronger, the food cheaper, and the old men and old women warmer in the winter and happier in the summer. In February 1955, Behan married horticultural illustrator for the Irish Times Beatrice French Salkeld, daughter of the painter Cecil French Salkeld. A daughter, Blanade, was born in 1963, shortly before Behan's death. Behan found fame difficult. He was a long-term heavy drinker, describing himself on one occasion as a drinker with a writing problem, and claiming, "I only drink on two occasions, when I'm thirsty and when I'm not." The public wanted the witty, iconoclastic, genial broth of a boy, and he gave that to them in abundance, once exclaiming, "There's no bad publicity except an obituary." Behan died on 20th of March 1964 after collapsing at the Harbour Lights Bar in Eklund Street, Dublin. He was transferred to the Meath Hospital in central Dublin, where he died aged 41. The funeral. It was described by several newspapers as the biggest Irish funeral of all time after those of Michael Collins and Charles Stewart Parnell. Acclaimed Irish sculptor James Power sculpted Brendan Behan's death mask. Following his death, his widow had a son, Porge Behan, with Cathal Golding, Chief of Staff of the Irish Republican Army and the official IRA. Behan had a one-night stand in 1961 with Valerie Danby Smith, who was Ernest Hemingway's personal assistant and later married his son, Dr. Gregory Hemingway. 9 months later, Valerie gave birth to a son she named Brendan. Brendan Behan died 2 years later, having never met his son.
A hungry feeling came on me stealing, and the mice they were squealing in my prison cell. And that old triangle is went jingle jangle along the banks of the Royal Canal. To begin the morning, the screw was bawling, "Get out of bed and clean up your cell." And that old triangle, it went jingle jangle along the banks of the Royal Canal. Oh, the screw was peeping, and Humpy Gussie lay sleeping, as he lay there weeping for his girl Sal. And that old triangle, it went jingle jangle along the banks of the Royal Canal. But in the female prison there are 70 women, and I wished it was with them that I did dwell. Then that old triangle could go jingle jangle along the banks of the Royal Canal.